If you were to watch three NASCAR races, one from 1993, another from 2003, and a third from 2013, you would notice that by and large, these three races are relatively similar. Sure, the cars likely look different, but some of the drivers between those different races would likely be the same, and the cars would drive functionally the same. Many of the tracks would be very similar. But if you were to try to do this experiment with a race from 2023, you would notice that the sport would be in some ways unrecognizable if it wasn't for the name NASCAR. And if you were to ask people who have seen those changes take place over the last 20 odd years, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who would say that even the majority of those changes have put NASCAR going in the right direction, that many of those changes had a positive effect on the sport. So, how did we get here? How did NASCAR management fumble the bag, per se, so horribly? Well, that's what I'm going to be going over in this video. It's going to be based, as you might imagine, on the title, which is going to be something along the lines of NASCAR management is not particularly great. And just to let you know ahead of time, this video is not scripted. I'm doing this off the cuff, just kind of going into whatever topic I think is necessary to get my point across. There'll probably be some cuts here and there, but I will fumble over my words. I will likely repeat points and lose my train of thought. But every time I tried scripting this video, I ended up not getting across everything I wanted to say in as much depth as I wanted to put into it. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, well, I know I just said let's get into it, but I do have to start with something else briefly before I get into the real meat and potatoes of the discussion. And that is, I want to give a brief background on my time as a NASCAR fan. Now, the reason why I feel this is important to lead with is I want to make sure people understand that I'm not somebody who came into the sport, 30, 40 years ago, saw a lot of the old Winston era with, no points resets, things like that. But I also don't want people to think that I'm one of these newer NASCAR fans that didn't watch anything before they started lowering the horsepower and didn't see anything before stage racing and am just kind of going off of nostalgic clips that I see on Twitter. So I just want to make sure that I get that point across with this section. I'll try to make it as quick as I can. You're welcome to skip through it if you don't want to listen to it. But I do think it's important for what I have to say going forward. So I started watching NASCAR off and on from around 2007 to 2009, but I wasn't all that invested in it. I really just did it because my dad was a NASCAR fan, and so I would just kind of watch the races with him. But it wasn't until early 2010 that I really made the decision to start sitting down and paying attention to NASCAR racing. And I started to pay attention to the drivers and the teams and the strategy during the race. I started to keep track of all that stuff. And by the second half of 2010, I was watching every single cup race that I had time to watch, which, as a kid, was basically all of them. And then in 2011, I added the Xfinity and the Truck Series I should say the Nationwide Series and the Truck Series to my viewing habits. And then I even started watching the what was called the K&N Series at the time. Now it's the ARCA East and West, as well as ARCA and even the Wheel and Modified Tour. So I was consuming about as much NASCAR as I possibly could at the time. I'm talking practice, qualifying. I was playing the NASCAR video games all the time, watching NASCAR videos on YouTube, mainly crash compilations, whether it be in real life, or real life crash compilations, or video game crash compilations from stuff like the Utenix games or NR 2003. I also watched even the Preseason Thunder back when they did that. So NASCAR was a huge chunk of my life for a long time. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I went to about 4 races from 2011 to 2013. I got to see Jeff Gordon win in 2013 at Martinsville, so that was pretty cool. I'm kind of getting sidetracked here, but point is that I was a NASCAR fan for a fair bit of time before they started lowering the horsepower. And it took me a while into 2015 to realize that they lowered it. That's actually why I started watching shows like NASCAR Race Hub and NASCAR America, is because I didn't really have a good way to keep up with the news. I wasn't really on social media that much. I eventually migrated to social media in around like 2017, but that's more because I found the races around then kind of boring. And that's the next point, is that I wasn't particularly happy with the product in 2015 or 16. 16 was better than 2015 for sure, but neither of them were on par with any of the seasons that came beforehand. Even 2013, which is one that a lot of people give a lot of crap. I thought that season was a lot better than people made it out to be at the time, or make it out to be now. It was certainly a step down for the COT. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's still pretty underrated. I'm getting sidetracked. Back to the point. Um, I wasn't a big fan of 2015 or 2016, especially the way that Carl Edwards, I mean, even at the time, I could see that was a blatant, stupid yellow that should not have been thrown. But moving into 2017, I was excited as ever for NASCAR because mainly, Jeff Gordon had just retired, but I'd found my new favorite, well, not found my new favorite driver, I should say. I had been rooting for Kyle Larson for like half of a decade by that point. But now that Gordon, when Gordon retired, Larson was my favorite in 2016, and it felt like he was just getting better and better. So I couldn't wait for 2017. But even though Larson performed really well in 2017, I didn't really care a whole lot about what I was watching anymore. As the year went on, it felt like more of a chore to watch NASCAR than it ever had felt before. And I was just unsatisfied with the product. It wasn't keeping my interest. And at the time, I was really depressed because I thought that I was just growing out of race cars in general. I thought that I just didn't care as much about NASCAR racing as I used to. I thought that, maybe I was growing out of it and finding different hobbies to get into away from stock car racing. But at the same time, I also was playing more NASCAR racing games than ever. I was joining and even running leagues on the NASCAR Heat games. I started getting into NR 2003, like actually driving it myself and doing like AI races and things like that. So I came to the realization around the off season from 2017 that it wasn't that I didn't care about NASCAR as a whole. I didn't care about the current product that I was seeing on the racetrack. And I confirmed this by going back and watching a bunch of races that off season that happened before I started watching NASCAR. So from like early COT before I was really paying attention, or like late Gen 6, mid 2000s kind of stuff, even some early 2000s and late 90s. And I really enjoyed the racing product. I was engrossed in it once again. So I came to this realization that something that was going on with the modern NASCAR product just wasn't keeping my interest like it used to. And I know this is off topic, but I want to mention it now. I've had like a sinus bug for like a week now. So if I sound awfully nasally, then that's why. I promise you, I don't sound like I have a clip closing my nose the whole time. This is just because I'm a little under the weather, but I've been wanting to make this video for a while, so I figured I'd go ahead and do it now. Anyway, back to the point. Back to the story here. 2019 was even worse than before. I have been cautiously optimistic because I genuinely enjoyed the 2018 All-Star race. I'll just say that. I genuinely liked it. It was a super speedway race, but I mean, it was better than what we had seen at a lot of the intermediates beforehand, and it was certainly better than what we saw at the Coca-Cola 600 that year. I can tell you because I was there in person. I watched the Coca-Cola 2018 Coca-Cola 600. That race was putrid. Okay, it was terrible. I know a lot of it was because the PJ1 and the tire dragging nonsense they were doing on the outside lane. I didn't enjoy it at all. It was terrible. Anyway, back to the point. 2019 was bad, like really bad. And that's when I really started getting pissed off with dirty air. Because in 2015, I didn't really notice it. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. And then by the time 2019 rolled around, I knew it was dirty air. And before the pandemic, I just could not care less about NASCAR. I still tuned into every race. But I started to shift my focus mainly towards the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series. because that's where I was finding more of the traditional style racing that I liked, mainly at the time the truck series. But I noticed Xfinity was getting really good. But then after the pandemic, I really got into the Xfinity series, and I really couldn't care all that much about Cup. Part of that was because Kyle Larson wasn't in the Cup series the rest of that year, but also because I just felt like the rest of 2020, aside from the cool midweek races, was just such a drag. It was just not, in my opinion, all that interesting. I didn't really enjoy it that much. Um, and then 2021, I actually liked a fair bit, especially the Xfinity racing once again was great. Um, but I did like a lot of the Cup races. The 550 races were a wash, but we all knew that at that point. But we were getting great racing almost every time we made a stop at a short track or a road course or a super speedway. There were a couple of stinkers here and there, but it was only like one out of every four races on those types of tracks was bad. You know, for every for every 2021 Daytona 500, there was a 2021 Fall Talladega. So it wasn't bad. It was just, it wasn't like all that bad. It was just, one out of every four at those tracks would be a stinker. Um, but I started to get really nervous for 2022 when the specs of the next gen were announced. And my deepest fears were confirmed in the Martinsville race in 2022. I have once again been cautiously optimistic after the first couple of races, minus the Daytona 500. Didn't like that race all that much. But then after that spring Martinsville race, I was like, okay, this car is just as bad as I thought it was going to be. And in case anybody doesn't believe me that I knew exactly how bad things were going to be all the way in spring of 2022, I have videos on this channel of me playing Minecraft for some reason, but discussing the problems of the next gen. Like, I mean, I was back then talking about the diffuser and the wider tire and the stronger brake. Nobody else touched that stuff for 2 years. I was on there talking about it. Now, the reason I make a point to say that here is because watching the rest of 2022, I gave it a chance, but with every race, I got more and more frustrated. And by the end of the year, I was just done. I wasn't angry more so, as I was more so just apathetic. I didn't care that much about what I was watching anymore. Like if I thought I didn't care that much after 2017, I really didn't care in 2023. Aside from the Daytona 500 that year that I watched with a watch party or watched with my friends in a watch party, I did not watch another race, another NASCAR Cup race, until whatever race was the first on NBC. I think it was Nashville that year. I went to the Coca-Cola 600 just because I had a tradition of doing that. But I didn't like the race again at Nashville. I was like, I tuned back in because my friends got me to watch again because I was like, if I'm going to have to watch this, I'm certainly not watching Fox. So I watched NBC, and of course the Nashville race was terrible. It was just Chastain air blocking Truex the whole time at a track even shorter than a mile and a half, which was just horrifying to witness. But what really drove me insane, and this really drove me insane in 2022 as well, is why I stopped making videos then, and why it took me so long to make videos again, is that the NASCAR fan base was riding the hype train, the aura train, as the youngins call it nowadays. They were riding the hype train so hard that it didn't seem like there was any point in me saying all the negative things about the next gen because no one was going to listen. Everybody was basically in the mindset of, we have a stinker occasionally, but most of the races are a certified banger. And it was so the rose tinted glasses were so hard, like hardwired into people's skulls at that point, that people watched the Nashville finish that year, which is basically a carbon copy of Logano Harvick with the air blocking. And they said it was great because, oh, what a great defense by Chastain. So I was like, okay, there's no point in me bothering saying this. So I'm just going to hang out with my friends and, watch races with them occasionally. but NASCAR's not really for me anymore. And I just stuck to the Xfinity series and the truck series. But then as time moved on and we move into 2024, as the year goes on, people start to get more and more frustrated with the car. And now we're at a point in 2025 where I feel like people are finally willing to accept the possibility that not all is right with NASCAR right now, and we're going to have to take some not just small changes, but some massive swings at the product to get things back to where it should be. So that's why I'm making videos again, and that kind of gets us up to speed with where we are now. So once again, I want to reiterate, the reason I point all this out is because I don't want people to think that I'm somebody stuck in the past who can't get over the kind of racing that I saw in my childhood. And at the same time, I don't want people to think that I'm a new age fan who doesn't really know what I'm talking about and am just living off of Twitter clips. That's not where I'm coming from with this angle. That's not how I'm approaching this discussion. And that discussion that I'm approaching right now is about NASCAR management. Because before we can get into anything else, which believe me I will, there will be videos, and I'll be making a series of videos after this one discussing specific problems with NASCAR and how to fix them. And today's video is discussing NASCAR management. Because before we can do anything, we need management that is willing to make that change. Now, this point here that I'm going to make is probably going to be very controversial, if anybody even watches this video, but it's going to be controversial nonetheless. I think that the Brian France era was better than what we have right now. And not just for the car itself or the product or whatever, but because of Brian France's style of leadership. Brian France was definitely a step away from the style of leadership from the Bill Frances. But it was not a complete division. Like, it wasn't a complete separation. There was still a resemblance in his style of leadership. What I mean by that is, Brian France, for all of his faults, and he had many, only really focused on stuff in the sport that was a topic of fan discussion. Whether or not I agree with his decisions, he still wouldn't just pick a random thing and say, hey, let's do this because it's cool. Like, for example, Brian France didn't get rid of bringing racing back to the caution because he thought it was dangerous or because he just randomly thought it up one day. It was because there was an incident with some close calls where I think it was Dale Jarrett stuck on the front stretch at New Hampshire, and there was fan outcry to do something about it. And so he responded. Why was the championship format changed? Because Brian France heard, it was a big point of discussion, and so he did something about it. So I think you can get the point here. There were very few things that he did that he just kind of up and decided, hey, let's do this thing. And the few things he did do that on, like green, white checkers and double file restarts, were things that were tested and in other series to make sure that they would work for the Cup Series. They weren't things that they just randomly decided to do. They were something that was tested live in full NASCAR sanctioned series to see if they work. The only exception to this is stage racing. But to be honest, it wasn't even that, to be honest, it kind of was, because it was tested for years in the All-Star race. And so they kind of knew that idea wouldn't be chaotic and wouldn't cause major problems. I still don't like it, don't get me wrong, but it's not been as disastrous. Well, I'm not going to say that. But point is, I'd say stage racing is the least of these issues because fans were calling for removing the stupid debris cautions, not planned stupid debris cautions. But aside from stage racing, he really only did things that were a focus of fan or team or OEM discussion. Now let's take a look at modern NASCAR. A lot of the things that they choose to do are just whatever they would think is cool in the moment. It's like if you give a 7-year-old control over their favorite, favorite sport, you could say. You just have them saying, or basically, like I could just imagine the Chicago street course, for example, exists because someone in NASCAR management said, hey, wouldn't it be cool to do a street race in a major American city? And, there was no forethought put into it. There was no thought about, what's the least impactful track that we can take off the schedule, or anything like that. They just decided to ram it through. And now they're blowing $5 million a year on a track that, save for when it rains, and NASCAR doesn't have to shorten the race and blow up everybody's strategy for no reason. Not for no reason. I get why they're doing it, but point is, they're blowing up everybody's strategy. Aside from that, like when you look at the actual racing product, it's no better than any other road course on the schedule. It's not, in many cases, it's worse than other road courses. They were blowing like $3 million on the LA Coliseum race every year, which wasn't particularly good and was either boring or a wreck fest. Things like that. The next gen exists because I guarantee Jim France was like, hey, he's a big fan of sports car racing, and so he decided to bring some of that over to NASCAR. And because NASCAR was like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we had all these new features on the race car? And now we're sitting here with an expensive hunk of junk that needs Goodyear tire, like crazy Goodyear tires and promoters caution and like a 4 wide 3-lane short track just to make it look somewhat presentable to the audience. So yeah, not great leadership in my opinion. And this is because the people running NASCAR today are more concerned with what their own agenda, which exists for whatever reason, mind you. Whether it be to get another manufacturer back just because they want another manufacturer, whether it be to get a street race, whatever it may be. NASCAR just operates nowadays based on what kind of things they like to see. When they say we like what we're seeing, what they mean by that is they like what they're seeing, not in a business sense. Like, how a CEO of a company might say, we like what we're seeing in terms of like our sales, our engagement or whatever. They mean it as in like if they themselves as quote unquote race fans are enjoying what they're watching on TV. That's what it is. That they don't actually mean it in the sense of it's good for NASCAR. It means it entertains them as fans. And so the problem with this style of leadership is that it's not focused on the fans. And this is where I get bugged with people talking about, let's listen to the drivers. Let's listen to the people like that. Because they oftentimes don't have good ideas either. I mean, Dale Jr. was advocating on his podcast to bring the caution clock back. Brad Keselowski was saying that we should get rid of the points basically and only use them to solve tiebreakers and just give them out of the championship to the guy who has the most wins at the end of the season. We have Kyle Larson and Ryan Blaney shilling for the next-gen car and Cliff Daniels calling what the monstrosity that what happened at Bristol. I can't even call that a race, saying that was a traditional old 90s Bristol race. These people, they do not have the best ideas here. What we need and who we need in charge, and this is, I guess, my let's fix it section, is we need a promoter in charge of NASCAR. We need somebody whose job it is and whose job it has been for years to look at what the fans are saying and use that to promote the product. Not somebody who just says, oh, I think this would be cool, so let's do this or that or the other. Somebody who approaches things from the perspective of, okay, this is what the fans are asking for. How can I go about getting this with the options that I have? That's the kind of thing we need. And if you look at it, that's basically how the Bill France has operated during like when growing NASCAR. They operated like promoters and like businessmen. They did whatever would earn NASCAR the most money, which was, earning money. The way you earn money as a sport is by getting people to show up to your events and by getting people to watch your events. Because one, that brings in revenue on its own, and two, because that brings in sponsors. Sponsors bring in people participating who pay fees to participate. So the more viewership, the more attendance you have, the better off your sport will be. And they understood this. And they did anything to get those numbers up. They didn't do anything to earn money necessarily. They did anything to get the most fan attendance and engagement and viewership. And if you look at all the things that the Bill Francis did, I mean, it worked because they grew NASCAR into a juggernaut. Aside from a few times where they let things slide to try to, get something that the fans would like, letting Richard Petty's win stand when his engine was too big, things like that. For the most part, they maintained credibility in the sport because they had to. Because the only way people watch sports is if it has some sense of credibility in it. And it's entertaining. And that's what they did. They focused on making the sport engaging every single lap. That's their whole goal. They would focus on what kind of stuff the fans wanted to see. And they would just lay down the law with drivers or teams, and they couldn't care less about the TV product. They were just like, we're gonna run NASCAR as whatever is best for the fans, for the majority of the fans. That's how they operated. And that kind of leadership is sorely lacking in NASCAR right now. I mean, we have them, for what it's worth, they're saying, oh, we would love to up the horsepower, but the engine manufacturers just don't want to make engines that powerful anymore. Okay, why does that matter to me? Like, why is that important? Why does what the OEMs say, oh, they don't want to spend the money? Okay, well, thanks for your input. Now make a 900 horsepower engine. I mean, I genuinely don't think it's possible for me to care less about what the OEMs think. I mean, I know they'll say like, oh, they're gonna pull out of the sport. No, they're not. No, they're not. They're not gonna pull out of NASCAR if you make that kind of engine. It's not gonna happen. Okay, I promise you. Dodge pulled out around the same time they stopped putting all the horsepower in the engine, and I know it was for other reasons, but the point is that the OEMs have far too much control. The teams have far too much control. NASCAR just isn't willing to lay down the law with people and say, look, I know you don't want to spend this money, but we're going to do this anyway. Maybe NASCAR could look into other ways to fix the situations we're in. Maybe NASCAR could say, hey, we'll take some of that some $1 million we're blowing every year on the street course that they've admitted they know they will never make back. And instead, let's invest that money in, I don't know, paying more for race wins or paying more into the charters or something. Maybe they can do that. So, I mean, like, the reason we have this whole charter kerfuffle is because NASCAR wasn't willing to tell the teams to screw off when they were begging for charters. NASCAR wasn't willing to tell the teams, just deal with it, whatever. Oh, you want more money from your sponsors? Well, too bad. Maybe you should spend all that effort worrying. Maybe you should spend that effort actually qualifying into races, and then you won't have to worry about that, huh? Instead of just saying that, NASCAR tried to come up with the charters, and now it's biting them in the butt. So, anyway, all this is to say that NASCAR's leadership lacks a spine these days, and their ideas are not particularly good. We need a promoter in charge of NASCAR, not a former driver or crew chief or team member or team owner or marketing major or broadcaster. We don't need any of those people in charge of NASCAR. The people we need in charge of NASCAR are promoters. The best solution would be find a track around the NASCAR sphere that is doing a great job at getting people to show up. Find that person and put them in charge. A name that comes to mind, once again, this is going to be a very controversial take, I know, so it doesn't have to be him. I'm not putting him forward as my recommendation, but I'm just going to use him as an example. Marcus Smith. Marcus Smith of SMI, despite his flaws, for the most part, is willing to put aside whatever he thinks would be cool in favor of what the fan base wants to see. Marcus Smith was responsible for taking Kentucky off the schedule, which, as you might know, most fans hated profusely. He was in charge of doing a lot the new repave strategy, where you mix in the old concrete with the new to get it to wear out more quickly. Why? Because fans wanted to see old, worn out racetracks. He left Atlanta as old as he could until it started completely falling apart. And then, what did he do when it was falling apart? He reconfigured it. I'm not a big fan of the reconfiguration happening to Atlanta. It should have been Texas. But still, it races pretty good, all things considered, with the Cup car. And, I think as time goes on with the truck and the Xfinity Series car and the surface wears out, it's going to be like the old, late 90s, early 2000s style of super speedway racing. So, Marcus Smith, sure, he's done some dumb things. He's done some good things too. And a lot of those good things have come in recent memory, when he has very good access to social media to where you can see directly what the fans are asking for. And, once again, people, I'm literally recording this the night of the All-Star race. People can say what they want about the promoter's caution. The promoter's caution turned that race into yet another dull next-gen short track race into something watchable at the end. So, not a big fan of having, meaningless cautions, but still, he at least figured out how to make the All-Star race entertaining for the first time in a while. So there's that. Better job than anybody at NASCAR's done. So, at least I know it's a low bar to clear. It's literally in the ground, but still, he cleared it. And if it's not him, find somebody else. Find the guy whoever runs Phoenix. Phoenix gets people to show up all the time. They did apparently a great renovation. They get people to show up for 2 boring, horrible races a year. So get them to run it. Find somebody else, maybe for Watkins Glen. They always sell out, despite the fact that it's been bum boring the last couple years. So find somebody at one of these tracks that performs really well and put them on your committees and your panels. Even if you don't want to make them CEO, no, not CEO, but if you don't want to make them like competition director or something, or president of NASCAR, then at least put them on your board or your committees or whatever. That's a good idea, in my opinion. So anyway, I got kind of rambling there and repeated the same point at the end a bunch. So I'll go ahead and wrap it up here. To recap everything I've said here, NASCAR management is instead of running things how they think the fans would want, they run things how they themselves want to do it and how their partners want them to run it. And that has resulted in a sport that is far removed from what the fan base wants to see. It's no longer concerned with putting on a product that the fans want to watch. It's far more based on gaslighting them than actually listening to what the fans are asking for. And that means we need a massive change in leadership before anything meaningful can happen to move the sport back in the right direction. I don't know when or where that change would come from, but it's going to have to happen sooner or later. The ratings aren't going to stabilize forever. I see more and more people on social media saying how they're tuning out. The ratings are going down in races that really shouldn't have the ratings going down. So it's definitely something to worry about. It's definitely something to look at for NASCAR. They've got to really figure this out. And in my opinion, they don't have too long to do it. And I'm not saying it's all doom and gloom, but they need to get on this because fan sentiment is now so low that the opposite of the aura effect is taking place, where people are now rating halfway decent races as bad because they're angry at the current product, and it's just tainting everything, even the good stuff. So that's a worrying sign for me. Well, in terms of worrying in terms of NASCAR staying afloat. But it's nice to see that people are finally taking these issues seriously. But that's going to do it for this video. I hope it wasn't too much of a rambly mess. I hope it's something that people actually will want to watch. My next video is going to be talking about the NASCAR mediascape, whether it be, quotes from drivers or team members or team owners or OEMs, or whether it be, from the NASCAR media itself, from like podcast hosts, or, broadcasters, or whether it's from NASCAR management itself. Going to be talking about the comments that they make, and how the fan base should address those going forward. But that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Once again, sorry for the nasaliness and the rambliness. Just kind of getting used to making videos like this again. I hope it's something that you guys want to see. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'm eager to see what you guys think, and recommend me any topics that you want me to go over, NASCAR related or not, because I'm more than happy to talk NASCAR to death. I'll talk anybody's ear off about it. So leave anything you'd like me to discuss in the comments below, and I'll get to that in a maybe I'll make a responding to comment style video at some point. But that's going to do it. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.